Here are some other great videos from Cabin Fever Entertainment.
Get ready to sign up for a crash course in racing. Take a look at some of the most dramatic crashes in stock car history and share an in-depth discussion by 3 drivers who know them all too well. Harry Gant, Bill Parsons, and Benny Parsons.
You know, we're looking at crashes that happen at 200 miles an hour. 200 miles an hour, folks. That is no exaggeration.
Learn how fans can see a wreck developing before the drivers do. Find out why hand signals at 200 miles per hour save lives. And discover how television cameras can help you pick a winner.
The tires never hook up the first corner, maybe the first 2 corners. So Harry looked to me like Harry was just being cautious.
Featuring special guest, racing legend A.J. Foyt. A crash course in racing is the education you need to make you a more informed racing fan. Available now on home video from Cabin Fever Entertainment. If it's dangerous, it's here. If it's life-threatening, we've got it. If it crashes, it's in this video. Thrills, spills, and crashes. That's what makes for a death-defying sport. Cabin Fever Entertainment presents Champions of Death-Defying Sports, Volumes 1 and 2. 2 new home videos that contain an absolutely heart-stopping collection of the world's most dangerous sports and the champions who dare perform them. Catch the world's most courageous thrill-seekers in the wildest collection of action-packed heroics anywhere. Champions of Death-Defying Sports, Volume 1 and Volume 2.
There's nothing that feels any better than a race car when it's handling properly and you're running real fast, not running everybody. But the name of the game is winning, because you show me a good loser, and I'll show you men that don't know what winning's like. Kind of made me mad. I went home, Mother asked what happened. I said, damn, Daddy throwed me out. I was hot-headed and told Firestone, well, let's take your tires and shove them. So we run them out of the business. Some of the guys you don't want to be on the outside of, regardless if they're running slow or fast. Some of them are lost all day long. The guy said, hit me in the head. I mean, that's how bad it's hurting. And I meant it. It wasn't a joke deal. I mean, I just said, hit me with something. I don't know of one race I've ever run that at one time or another I didn't just thrill the hell out of myself. Now you'll hear guys say, oh, never scared me, but all they're doing is lying to themselves and lying to you, because there's not one race driver, if he'd be honest, that car at one time or another didn't thrill the hell out of him.
A.J. Foyt. Short on temper, long on versatility. Quick to adapt and slow to change. He survived crippling crashes, fire, and the deadly 60s. He's manhandled roadsters, conquered the rear-engine revolution, and soared into the 4-wheeled space age. He's raced with 2 generations of Unsers and Andrettis, and 8 presidents have come and gone during his career. He's whipped the stock car set's finest at Daytona, left the world's best road racers in his wake at Le Mans, and was the first 4-time winner of the Indianapolis 500. Nobody has started, finished, or won more races than this tempestuous Texan. While the face of auto racing has undergone major changes during his 5 decades of competition, he's remained an original, an uncompromising, hot-headed, cool-handed, hard-working, smooth customer who can warm your heart one minute and ice your veins the next. He's Anthony Joseph Foyt Jr., an American hero and a champion for life. This remarkable story began in the city of Houston, Texas in 1935. Tony Foyt Sr. worked as an auto mechanic by day and on midget race cars by night. On January 16th, his wife Evelyn gave birth to a son who was not to grow up on a swing set like most kids. By age 4, AJ was already driving a miniature race car, and his neighbors crazy.
This is actually out in the Heights where I was born and raised. It's 505 West 25th Street. Had a lot of fun memories here. Like I said, the roads they do have paved here now, but they used to be gravel and rock, and There was a lady down on the corner at the end of the street that every time I'd get my little race car out that he built for me, I'd throw rocks in the yard. She'd have the police would come up here and get on me, and I'd always run in the house and hide from them until Mom, the police are out here again. So it brings back a lot of memories, and every now and then I drive by the house here just to see what it still looks like.
At age 6, he went up against local midget star Doc Cossey in a special exhibition race at Playland Park. In front of a packed house, he scored a popular, if not staged, victory, and the seeds of success were planted.
That car, I guess, at that time would run about 40, 45 miles an hour, which I think it had like a 8 or 9 horsepower motor in it. It run good. It was very good looking. It was a copy of Doc Cossey's car.
Growing up in a poor side of town, Foyt had the lure of cars and engines to keep him occupied, and his dad's no-nonsense attitude to keep him under control.
A friend of mine was driving my car that was souped up, and the cops got after us, and they chased us, and, you know, I knew my father would punish me and tear me all to pieces. So I jumped out of the car, and then they jumped out of the car and locked it up, and then I reported it stolen, and then finally I did admit it, and they called my father, and I said, just put me in jail. I said, at reformatory school, I don't want to be released to my father. I said, because I know what he'll do. They says, no, we think you're a good boy, and they didn't file no charges, and they called my father, and they told him they'd release me to him if he didn't whip me, and he said he would not whip me, and so as we're going back over to the race shop, I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he said, I'm not going to say it to your grandmother, but every day about 3:30, you better be at the race shop. And he said, you're punished for a year. And I had my car taken away for 1 year solid, and it was sitting right there in the driveway, and I looked at it for 1 year. 3 types of people that come from the heights. They either made it, or they're in the penitentiary or dead. There was no in between, so I guess I was one of the lucky ones that made it through the grind. Actually, the first race I ever driven, I went and bought me a stock car, and I built it, and it was kind of a modified stock car there at Playland Park. That was actually the first car, and I just wanted to go racing, and then I took our midget, and I went what you call a Tangerine tournament in Florida, and I run a lot of the midget races there, and then in '55, I went up to Indianapolis and qualified for one of the races across the street in Indianapolis, and was hoping someday I'd be fortunate enough to ever drive at Indianapolis. I know I went to the race that next day and sit in the grandstand, and I seen the drivers drive and back off, and I said, man, they can drive a lot deeper in the corners than they're driving. But after I was fortunate enough to get a ride back there in 1958, I realized, well, you couldn't drive them in that deep after all.
AJ's often said getting teased and taunted about his old man's cars really fueled his desire to win and provided some early motivation.
A lot of people would tease me, what's wrong? The old man's slipping, the old man can't build a car like he used to. Well, he had just as good a car as he ever had, and I just made up my mind that when I drove that I was going to try to win. I knew the cars could win, and we started winning a lot of races.
While Tony Sr. paid the bills, built the engines, and maintained the midget, keeping his kid in tow was another matter.
Driving one night at San Antonio, it's a quarter-mile dirt racetrack, and I guess I was acting wild, and I was fairly young, and he got mad at me, and he said, either settle down on driving or I'm going to load the damn thing up in the heat race. I got beat in the heat race, and I remember I got mad, and I threw it off in the corner wide open and broad slide it. He said, that's it. I come in, he said, put the damn car on the trailer. I said, Daddy, why you acting like a damn idiot tonight? Oh, he lit into me. I said, well, look. He said, no, I told you to drive right or I'll park it. So he said, just put it up. So he loaded it on the trailer, and R.L. Furnace, and I know it made my father mad. And he said, what's wrong? I said, Daddy took the car away from me, put it on the trailer. He's not going to let me run the feature. R.L. said, well, you want to drive my car? I said, hell yeah. I drove the car and won the feature, and the old man, boy, he was hot. So I still won the race that day, the main event. That's 1956. I won't ever forget it.
Barnstorming across the country on dusty and dangerous dirt tracks wasn't a moneymaker, but it was certainly a character builder. A guy could win the trophy dash, his heat race, and the feature, and not take home $35. But dreaming of the big time kept AJ's drive alive.
Oh, he had his dreams, of course, and he talked about them. But do you ever really think that you're going to be there? I don't think you ever think that you're going to hit that point.
In 57, 58, I was running probably 40 or 50 races a year. I'm talking about sprint cars and midgets and everything the same season. I mean, we would start out, maybe run Indianapolis, the next night Champaign, Illinois, over Brandy Coin, Illinois, Wisconsin, just wherever they had a midget race. We'd just drive most of the night and sleep in the back seat of the car and make the next race.
I tried traveling with him for a year, but we had a son then, a baby, and we tried traveling with him, and that didn't last very long. He got sick in the car one time, and AJ went clear across the country to take us home and drop us off, because it was just too hard. I had a nice house and everything, and he was living in hotels and basements and wherever he could find a place to stay.
I think a lot of people today don't realize how fortunate and lucky they are on some of the rides they get and flying to the races. I never dreamed I'd ever be flying to the races or anything like that. Back the old days, you'd put cardboard in your uniform and everything else, try to protect you from the rocks. Because your uniforms you drove, many times I come out with black eyes, my eyes busted open and my lips and bloody noses, but now you got full face helmets and like I say, you got protection all the way around you. And back in the older days, you know, you didn't even have no roll bars or roll cages, so you learned to thread the needle as fine as you thought you could, but nowadays you got so much more protection, which is good, but then again I think it takes away from some of the racing because you get some of the drivers that want to be wild and run over each other and over a wheel, and they flip and they brush your clothes off. Well, if we run over a wheel, you're normally laid in that hospital and you heal up and then you thought about it. Well, you come back and when you made sure you could pass a guy, you knew how to thread it really fine. And I think back then it made a more polished race driver than a lot of them you have today.
As dangerous as the cars were the dirt tracks strung all across the country. Deep holes would develop as the races wore on. The most treacherous of them all was Langhorne, Pennsylvania, a fast 1-mile test that terrified many and killed its share. Many good drivers refused to run there.
Langhorne, Pennsylvania was a very fast, probably the fastest dirt racetrack that we ever run on. It's very demanding of the driver, very demanding of the car, hard on equipment, and the biggest thing, a lot of drivers lost their lives over there. It was a dangerous racetrack. It was all dirt, and you run pretty much wide open all the way around the racetrack. And they had down in 1 and 2 what they call puke hollow. Well, down in puke hollow, the holes would get 2, 3, maybe 3.5, 4 feet deep. And you averaged over, back in them days, over 116 miles an hour a lap on a mile dirt racetrack. It was so rough, and you'd be so tired after 3/4 of a race that, you know, you'd lose control of your car.
At the same time Foyt was starting to make a name for himself, another young charger from Los Angeles was gaining speed. Rufus Parnell Jones, soon to be known simply as Parnelli, possessed the same penchant as AJ for running hard and fast. They became the fiercest competitors of their time.
In his racing days when he was a little younger, I mean, he had more desire than any race driver I've ever seen in my life. I think a part of that was that gave him 10% more was the fact that he was a Texan. I think Texans tend to think that they have a lot of desire, and AJ certainly is one of those.
Well, actually, at Ascot, every time we'd go out there with the midget races, it's the Texas boy against the California boy, I guess, and fortunate enough, I had some good midgets out there and good rides when I go out there in Parnelli. You know, of course, he was from Gardena there, and was kind of the local boy, and of course, naturally, you always want to beat, you know, the hometown boy. I guess I beat him probably as much as he beat me, but every time that I would go out there to race for J.C. Agajanian, I mean, they'd have packed grandstands because they always felt like one of us was going to kill herself. And
one time we were running midgets at Ascot, and it was in the trophy dash, and I was the fastest qualifier, and I was trying to get by him, and he pinched me off, and I wound up spinning the car.
I hit him a little harder than I expected to and spun him out. And he's standing in the middle of the racetrack, shaking his fist, and I was giving him hand signs back. I went on and won the race.
I said, that's it. I'm never talking to that guy again. I've had it with him. That's it. And so I was back there getting ready before the feature to working on my car. I was down on the ground, and I feel this big Huggy Bear thing come up behind me and give me a big hug like this, and of course, you know, it caught me completely off guard, and I turn around and obviously it's AJ.
We ran very hard together and, you know, very clean. And a lot of times we'd squeeze each other for his last lap, but we might want to be mad and want to fight, but later on that evening we'd all laugh it off.
And we've run a lot of wheel-to-wheel races, and I felt very comfortable with him. But I've seen him on other occasions running wheel-to-wheel with other guys, and I've been impressed with the fact that he is a very clean race driver.
Running on a cushion of dirt right up against a fence at 100 miles an hour was an art form, and Foyt always painted a pretty picture.
You just broadslide the car under power control and things like that, which you do. You can do it a little bit on the asphalt on the road courses or street courses, something like that, but you know, it's just the control of the race car, knowing that you're really the master of it. It's hard to really explain, but if you've ever driven dirt, like Pernelli Jones was very good on dirt, they could tell you, you know, it's just nothing like it.
In the 50s and 60s, dirt dominated the scene, but there were a trio of high-banked asphalt tracks in the Midwest that really tested a driver's daring do. In Ohio, there was Dayton, and in Indiana, Salem and Winchester housed these lightning-quick, lethal half-mile gut checks. Running the high banks in a Sprinter could be a one-way ticket to a big car ride at Indy or the morgue.
When I was running IMCA, Salem, Indiana was probably where I got my big break in Indianapolis racing. I went there as a rookie and I won the race. I guess I always felt like if you was good on the high banks, you could win anywhere. And that kind of, I guess, proves the point how brave a race driver was. Me winning at Salem in '57 gave me my big break for 1958 to go to Indianapolis. And I guess one highlights I'll never forget, I go to Indianapolis, I was eager and happy and thrilled to death that I got a chance to go there. And when I went to sign in, the guy said, "Who are you with?" I said, "Well, I'm driving for Dean Van Lines." He said, "I'm sorry, the car's not here yet. Come back later." And I'll never forget that the garage area at Indianapolis, of course, you couldn't get in the garage area. I stood around outside for 3 or 4 days trying to get in the garages, you know, and just looking at everybody out there and chomping at the bits. And finally, here come Clint with my car, and they let me in the racetrack, and I signed in, and that was when I got my big break.
Just a couple of years after watching from the grandstands, AJ found himself in a much better seat in 1958, outside of row 4 in the greatest spectacle in racing. He qualified 12th fastest at 143.13 miles per hour, and his first race was barely underway when the rookie found himself in the middle of a huge crash entering turn 3. He managed to continue, but crowd-pleasing driver Pat O'Connor lost his life.
I'll never forget that I spun in the wreck, and he's laying crossways in the racetrack, and the car then blew up and caught fire, and we went by 2 or 3 laps. He was still in the car, and naturally I knew he was dead. And I didn't know if I really wanted to take the occupation of being a race driver for a living or not after that, because I said, this game's a little too rough for AJ.
AJ wound up 16th after spinning out when a water hose broke. But the mortality of his profession and the need to keep an arm's length from his fellow drivers would stick with him forever.
First time I was ever, what you call, really exposed to death in a race car. I've seen some other boys get killed, but I was never involved with them or did not know them. So, and I did know him, and after that I've kind of shielded myself, and I've got a lot of friends, and but I never was ever real close to anybody.
Of the 33 starters in the 1958 Indy 500, 13 of them would die behind the wheel during the next few seasons. By 1960, Foyt had hooked up with master mechanic George Bignotti on the Bose Sealfast team. It was an explosive combination on and off the track, as this headstrong duo argued like they raced, fast and furious. Bignotti was already a winner, and it didn't take AJ long to find victory lane in George's well-prepared car.
The 1960 season was a melding of a superb driver and a superb car preparer. George Bignotti, believe it or not, before he was a racing mechanic, was a florist. But somehow he had the touch to work with Foyt and get the car just right for the track. Up until this point in racing, cars were hardly adjustable. You changed the spark plugs and the tires maybe, but you did little else. We were in an era now where mechanics could put wrenches on cars and adjust things to make the cars better. And Foyt had an innate feel for what made a car work well, and that contributed sharply to his success that year.
AJ and I were getting acclimated, so to speak, and DuQuoin was the first race we won. That was AJ's first race. He won in Indianapolis type racing, and about that time we would do, because we were knocking on the door and getting everything going together pretty well.
DuQuoin was my first win. It was a race that was a very hard race. The track was very rough and hot, and all the skin was off both my hands. Both my hands were almost bleeding, and they was plumb raw, but I was very happy, and that was when we finally broke the ice and got in the victory circle.
He got in a position and passed one at a time until he's leading the race, and he did it very nicely. In fact, all the way home, you know, in those days we didn't have a big van. We were driving a Chevrolet Nomad with the race car sitting on an open trailer. And I'm driving the car, and Foyt's banging me, did I look like I drove right? Did I do right? And he did okay, and he went on to win more races that way. He became a real contender.
Foyt's first win at DuQuoin was followed by 3 more, and with several strong finishes, he wound up as 1960 USAC national champion. So he came to Indy in '61 wearing #1 for Bignotti. He started 7th that May, and it was clearly a day that belonged to Eddie Sachs and AJ. They continually swapped the lead, and both had victory in their grasp.
Right at the early stages, you know, we started fighting with Eddie Sachs with the lead, and it was a race that we just raced hard all day. Then, right at the last pit stop, I got away from him, and I felt like I had the race won pretty easy. Then they gave me the pit board late stop, and I didn't understand that at first. And the next lap, they give me fuel. Well, I couldn't understand, you know, what happened. Then they said fuel malfunction, you know, and I had to make a late stop, and I figured here I got the race won, and we lost the race.
While he was racing out there, we borrowed another fuel nozzle from another team that had expired from the race. They didn't need it, so we put that on. And while he was racing, it actually helped us, because he was racing with a light load of fuel. Eddie Sachs had a full load of fuel, and Foyt just run right on by him. And Eddie was trying to catch him, and the faster Foyt went, the harder Eddie drove. And so towards the end of the race, we came in and refueled.
At the same time, he was running real hard, and he wore out his tire and went to 2 layers of card, which actually, if he had made another lap or 2, he'd probably blow the tire out and hit the wall. I know he would have blown the tire. So he had no other choice but to stop, but at that time, I didn't know it. And when they pulled him back in the pits, he had to change the tire right there at the end. They gave me back first. I said, here's the deal, that you're winning and you're losing, and then all of a sudden you win, which normally don't happen. The way I feel about racing is that day, even though we raced hard all day, everybody remembered A.J. Foyt, you know, but if the next day, if I'd have finished second, you could have said who won the race. They always remember the winner, but they never remember who ran second. Every race driver lives to go to Indianapolis to qualify, first of all, and then secondly, if you're ever fortunate enough and lucky enough to win the race, that is a major race in the world. That's like the Kentucky Derby. That's something that nobody can take away from you, and you can say, well, I have won the big one.
People say, well, Foyt was lucky. He was not lucky. He made the luck. He was in condition. He drove a race car at times when people thought, well, maybe he's sticking his neck out. No, he wasn't. He was driving that car to its ragged edge. And that's the way a race driver that really knows how to drive a race car will drive that race car. Then there's a point of driving beyond that point. And those are the race drivers that don't know why the race car is going, and they don't know when the race car meets its maximum. And that's the reason that Foyt, in his long career of driving all types of race cars, before the roll cages, before all the safety devices that we've got now, lived through it all. And I attribute that to his knowledge, not only as a race driver, but his dedication to knowing what makes a race car work, why a race car runs, why an engine keeps failing. And he spent time doing that. 24 hours a day he devoted to racing, and whatever Foyt has, he certainly earned.
Foyt claimed his second national crown in '61, but despite their success, Foyt and Bignotti continued to fight like the Hatfields and McCoys. Unlike most drivers, A.J. had a great grasp of a race car chassis and what made it work. His mechanical mind was the equal of many mechanics, and that was hard for George to accept.
We were testing some super oil that one of the oil companies sent us, and it stuck the exhaust valves open and the car quit coming down the straightaway. And he come in and raising heck with us, and so we started arguing about that. He came after me like he was hitting me, and I had a hammer, just teasing, but that was it.
Well, that was an Italian and a bohunk that we always argued about a lot of things, but we both respected each other very highly. So I decided, well, I'd go somewhere else, and then he decided, well, he'd get somebody else. So we went to the races, and I did out-qualify him, he out-qualified, but neither one of us was winning anything. So I think I finished one race second, so we decided to get back together, and we come back together, and like I say, we still respect each other today.
At the end of 1962, Foyt and Bignotti were reunited, and they immediately roared back into victory lane at Sacramento. Of course, Bignotti wasn't Foyt's only adversary.
I've seen him mad at his mechanics. I've seen him mad at people working on his car. I've seen him mad at the officials. I've seen him take a hammer to his car, and I've seen him run officials out of his garage. He has a temper, let's face it, and he speaks what's on his mind.
Just a complete idiot. You know, I've watched him race before, and he raced the same way, but he's got a lesson coming, a good lesson. You know, you ought to have your car under control where the hell you know where the brake pedal is. Damn shame what's going on with my crew, why they can't get their heads together. I kept from knocking him through the goddamn wall. I'm tired of this shit.
The temper tantrums, like I said, he's got a quick temper, but he never holds a grudge. He may get mad, he may cuss you out, he may scream and holler for a few minutes, but then he's through.
I never would hardly ever apologize to nobody because I never did feel like I was ever wrong when I would blow up. But a lot of times I did regret some of the things I did or some of the things I say, but I had to live with that. I never go kiss nobody's ass. I still won't.
In 1963, Foyt and Bignotti continued their verbal war, but set aside their differences long enough to win another USAC title. The following year, this talented twosome was literally unbeatable. In 13 races, AJ came home first 10 times, and nobody has ever dominated an IndyCar season in that fashion. Incredibly, every time the car didn't break down, AJ was first.
That's just something that's unbelievable. That races we shouldn't have won, we won, and I just couldn't believe the combination we had. Everything went our way that year.
At season's end, Foyt had earned an amazing $220,000 for Bignotti's Sheridan Thompson team and his 4th championship. The highlight of '64 was Indianapolis. The rear-engine invasion, led by Jimmy Clark and his Lotus Ford, looked unbeatable, and the front-engine roadster appeared all but obsolete during qualifying. Foyt was offered the revolutionary ride, but got into a feud with Ford and refused to switch, opting to stick with his reliable roadster. In the race, which was marred by a crash that took the lives of Eddie Sachs and rookie Dave McDonald, Clark ran away and hid until a suspension failure sent him to the sidelines. Foyt and Parnelli, who also stayed with his roadster, were left to do battle, and that's just what they were doing until Jones caught fire during a pit stop. AJ sped to his 2nd Indy win, and it was extra sweet because of the flap with Ford. On his victory lap, Supertex turned to the section where all the Ford Motor Company execs were seated and gave them that universal one-fingered salute.
You always live to win the race just once, and when I was fortunate enough to win it twice, it was just unbelievable. And I didn't soak in until about 2 or 3 days later, and you said, man, I've done won this race again. And then you start shooting for number 3 because there was 3 or 4 people that just won it 3 times, and you said, boy, if I could just join that group, you know, and so I was just very happy to win it twice.
Foyt's victory at Indy in 1964 would be the roadster's swan song, and when the '65 season began, AJ had reluctantly joined the rear-engine movement. But prior to USAC's opener, he was in Riverside, California for NASCAR's annual road race in January. He wound up in the hospital after his brakes failed and he rode out a wild, wicked crash that left him with a broken back. A.J. confounded everyone and made a miraculous recovery from a stock car crash to sit on the pole at Indianapolis.
You know, that was the first time I really was ever hurt real bad. And I was still young and in my prime, and I just loved racing, and it hadn't even entered my mind on retiring. A lot of people said, what else you got to prove? I said, nothing, I still want to race.
The highlight of the '65 season, and one of A.J.'s proudest moments, came on an August weekend. Foyt captured the 100-mile dirt race at Springfield, Illinois, and then headed for the Milwaukee Mile to be a spectator. His new rear-engine Lotus wasn't ready for the Milwaukee's paved oval. At the last moment, he decided to unload his dirt car and try to qualify with it. Well, he did more than just qualify, and by the end of the afternoon, the fans were hoarse from cheering, and another chapter of A.J.'s legacy was in the books.
Couldn't believe that I set the car on the pole with Gurney and Clark and Pernelli and everybody in there, and the rear-engine Fords, and here I got a car that I won with the day before, set on the pole at the 200-mile race at Milwaukee, and Lloyd Ruby won it in a rear-engine car, and I probably would have won the race, but I had to make a pit stop, and my car was mainly carried enough fuel to run 100 miles, not 200, so we had to stop, like I say, and refuel the car, and we actually still run second in the race, and so I'd have to say that's one of the highlights of my career. And Gordon come back to me, and he said, I said, racing back, he said, 15 years, he said.
Another challenge reared its head in '65 in the form of a skinny, daring Italian immigrant. Mario Andretti had busted out of Nazareth, Pennsylvania to shine in sprints and midgets. Clint Bronner, the man who discovered Foyt, snatched up Andretti in '65, and he finished third in his initial Indy 500. Fast and fearless, Mario thrilled the paying customers and incensed fellow drivers with his aggressive style.
For anyone coming on the scene, he was the man to beat. He was the yardstick, the one that everybody was shooting for. He was such a consistent winner, and he, you know, he had been there for, you know, that for many years.
The rivalry between A.J. Foyt and Mario Andretti was not just between two racing drivers. It was between two tire companies. A.J. Foyt had aligned with Goodyear, and Mario was a Firestone driver, and it was a vigorous, hard-fought, and sometimes bitter rivalry.
I know that A.J. was always one that you could definitely trust. Maybe I'm the one that was a little bit stretched out in some instances because I wanted to beat him so bad.
He ran awful hard to beat me, and like maybe he was using me as a gauge because we had a hot team going, but at the same time Mario was hard to beat too. And I remember at the dogleg at Phoenix when he chopped me off after I had the lead and I got blocked in traffic.
They were together on the track at Phoenix one day racing for the lead, and they came up behind a slower car. One went under it, one went around it, and when they came back for the line, they did a sideswipe collision because neither would give an inch. They were real competitors.
I took both of us out of the race, and like I said, he come down on me, and we've been having the rival bit a little bit, but that was probably one of the dumb moves I made because it's very lucky I didn't hurt either one of us, and you know, we had our words, but I was just very lucky, and probably shouldn't have made that move, but sometimes you do things in the heat of a moment, you know.
In 1965, A.J. and Bignati separated for good. The 1966 season was not a productive one for A.J., and about the only positive news was that Tony Sr. took over as chief mechanic after the team was consolidated and moved to Houston. In 1967, Andy Granatelli sprang a surprise on the IndyCar community that turned into one of the biggest controversies ever. Granatelli showed up in May with a futuristic four-wheel drive racer powered by a turbine engine. He had Parnelli Jones behind the wheel and everyone's attention. The turbine didn't sound like a race car when it went by, but it was clearly superior in handling and performance. Even though Jones didn't win the pole, he was long gone in the race until a $6 bearing failed. Foyt, the only driver to keep pace with the turbine, inherited the lead, but had to dodge a last lap pileup on the front straightaway.
And something just told me going down the back straightaway I had to race one easy. I think I had to race one by a lap or something like that. So I turned around and I backed off. Something just told me as I backed off and I come off of four, cars are sliding all over, and I said, oh, no, I won this race, but I lost it, can't get to the checkered flag, so I hit the brakes and come to immediate slowdown, and I'll never forget, we dropped it back in second gear, and I couldn't see, and I went weaving through where I thought was the right places, and I said, even if I hit somebody, I'm going to drive them past the start-finish line. You know, I was going to still keep trying to get it, and I couldn't believe when I come out of the smoke, and I was done missed everything. So that was a happy day. And to bring the operation back to Houston, Texas, build the cars here in Houston, Texas, and have a car that we put together. My father was chief mechanic. It was a very proud and happy moment, and especially to be one of the few drivers that won it 3 times. So everything was just wonderful in 1967 after the terrible year in '66.
His 3rd Indy win launched him into a 5th USAC title. And while Indy cars are showcased at Indianapolis, the plum of road racing is the 24 Hours of Le Mans, a fast, grueling test of men and machine that winds through the French countryside day and night. Le Mans requires equal doses of speed and stamina. Ford, by now on Foyt's good side, talked him into running its Mark IV sports car along with Dan Gurney in June of '67.
I think going in, we were voted least likely to succeed, and it was kind of fun, but we were almost a throwaway. They didn't know what to do with me, and they figured AJ wouldn't last long, and I explained to AJ, I'd been there, what, 7 times, and explained that this wasn't a race, it was an endurance contest, and therefore we should go at it with that in mind all the time, and that's how we did it, and we were as amazed as anyone that early in the race we were leading, and it turned out just terrific.
They kept saying, the newspapers, that we was Ford Motor Company's rabbits, because we led the race, I think, about 23 hours out of 24. And they kept thinking we'd break, but the car just worked super all day, all night. We just had no problems, and actually was running just as well at the end of the day, and when the race was over with, as it did when we started. A lot of people went over for years and never won the race, and I've been over one time, won the race, and come back to the United States, and I said I won't go back.
Back in the USA, stock cars were a popular complement to Indy cars in the South, and AJ enjoyed their challenge. Indy drivers never had much success in NASCAR, but of course, Foyt was the exception. He caught on quickly to taxicabs and how they drafted. He won 9 poles and 7 races, beginning with the Firecracker 400 in 1964, and in 1972 captured the prestigious Daytona 500.
Just because you can beat the boys you're running with, don't mean that you can beat everybody. And I've always been the type of driver that, regardless if we ran bicycles, if I felt like I could challenge and you know, be a threat to them, I'd like to go down there. So I guess that's one thing that inspired me a lot about going NASCAR racing.
You know, AJ was probably the most versatile driver I've ever driven against, as far as, you know, being able to drive Indy cars or sprint cars, midgets, sports cars. It didn't make any difference. And when he came, he'd already had a little bit of experience in stock cars. It wasn't a deal that when he came to run with us, the first time he'd ever run stock cars. He'd run 3A stock cars and stuff. He fit right in with us.
Anytime that you can go down there in their backyard and you can be competitive and not necessarily beat them, but I have been fortunate enough to win a few races down there. They're major races, but just run with them. You can take your hat off because you've done a hell of a job, and I don't care if you're AJ Foyt or whoever goes down there, because them boys run every week, and they're probably the toughest bunch of racers that's in the country.
He was probably the best IndyCar driver to come south and run the stock cars of the whole bunch, and he was as good as any of the guys that was running at that time, because he could go right out and run with them and win races with them, and that was a rarity.
From 1968 through '76, AJ built his own cars and engines, captured 19 more IndyCar victories, and his 6th USAC National Championship. He broke track records and sat on the pole position 3 times at Indy, but was frustrated by rain, poor pit stops, and mechanical misfortune. It appeared his 4th Indy win might not be a reality, but it finally happened in 1977 at age 42. The 200-mile-per-hour barrier had been broken that May, and AJ found himself in a dogfight on race day. By the 400-mile mark, it was a duel between 2 of the best, Gordon Johncock and Supertex. John Cox's engine expired from the torrid pace late in the race, and Foyt finally had that elusive triumph. Speedway owner Tony Hullman, who would pass away a few months later, was so overjoyed for his legendary buddy that he rode around with A.J. on the victory lap.
I felt like we should have won it in '75. We had some mechanical problems, and in '76 the rain caught us and they didn't restart the race. And in '77 we almost blew it again. We ran out of fuel with the car and kind of coasted in, lost a lot of time, but was fortunate enough to make it back up. And to win it 4 times really meant a lot to me because I was very close with Mr. Hullman, and he was wanting to see somebody probably win it 4 times, and then after I did win it 4 times, you know, Mr. Hullman passed away right after that, and he loved racing, and he did racing a lot of good. After the race was over with, and a few of the interviews were over with and things like that, my daddy was never what you call a drinker. So the crew and all of them was having a few beers there, and they was all, you know, petting each other on the back, how great they did today and all that. And I felt like 2 years prior to that, '75, '76, they cost me the race, you know, by just mistakes in the pits. So I told them, I said, well, let me ask y'all all one thing. Do you think I had something to do with this today? And my daddy's first time he's ever congratulated me, and what he says, well, you might have had a little bit to do with it, but that's about all. He never did ever tell me that I ever drove a great race or anything like that. So that was after the race. He finally did admit that I did a fair job. They worked together. They argued constantly. But you know, A.J. had such confidence in his father that he felt very comfortable when he knew his father was in charge of things. And his father always got mad at A.J. because he was always wanting to try something new and try the new things. And a lot of times they worked, and a lot of times they didn't work. And then they really got mad when they didn't work. Daddy used to always get mad when I tried something, but he was always pretty conservative and wanted to, and I've always been the type that liked to gamble. And I'll never forget that as long as I live. I guess he thought I was asleep one night, and she said, what happened? Damn, son, this trick box. He said he just out-tricked himself, so that was my daddy's famous words.
A.J. was still a man to be reckoned with, but the roof began caving in by 1981. His mother was gravely ill, and Foyt tried to maintain control on and off the track.
I'll never forget when I got in and I talked to Mama right before she passed away. She says, well, you was almost up here with me, son. I saw you hit the wall. You know, she's watching on TV. I said, oh, Mama, everything's all right. And then she started crying how much she loved me and how proud she was of me, which really kind of hurt. And I said, Mother, I'm home because tomorrow's Mother's Day. I come here to be with you. We're going to have a big day. And probably 10 minutes later, Mother died. And then 2 years later, you know, the same thing happened with my father. I qualified at Indianapolis, flew home real quick, got back, more or less said hello. He wouldn't talk to nobody. He talked to me right there in his dying days. He wouldn't talk to nobody else. And he waited till I got home after I was qualified for the race, and then he went ahead and passed away, like I say, at the same time my mother. Like they both waited till I qualified for Indianapolis. They waited till I flew home right after qualifying. I jumped in an airplane, flew right straight home that evening. And they more or less waited till I got home to talk to them and then close their eyes. And I'll be truthful with you, that really kind of set me back. You know, I didn't really care about anything, and I mean, I cared about my family, don't get me wrong, but I felt like everything was so wonderful in life, and then everything went to hell overnight. And it's been a hard road to come back. He couldn't settle down. He was going from thing to thing to thing, trying to find something to be content with. You know, I lost interest in everything. Businesses, racing, friends, you know, I just didn't care. He was just lost for a while. It took him, he had a good adjustment period, but once he came out of it, things came out fine.
Before Tony Sr. passed on, A.J. scored one of his greatest triumphs. It was 1983, and his father was fading fast. Foyt was keeping a bedside vigil when an offer came in to run the 24-hour sports car race at Daytona, Florida. A.J. declined, but Tony insisted he go. His original car failed early in the race, and another owner asked A.J. to co-drive with Frenchmen Bob Wallach and Claude Ballot-Lagna in a Porsche. Foyt had to be shown the shift pattern on a wrecked Porsche. At dawn, in the pouring rain, Wallach slid the car into the pits, and Foyt jumped in. At 200 miles an hour, he was kicking up huge rooster tails in the faces of all who trailed him. And that was everyone left in the race.
The track was very, very flooded, and it was, the car 3 or 4 different times hydroplaned on me real bad. And I think we run the fastest lap in the race or something like that, but no, it was very, very bad, very wet.
The American, who hadn't raced in the rain in 20 years, had outrun the Englishmen, the Italians, and the Germans with their years of experience racing in rain. When the team owner asked A.J. how much of the purse he expected, none of it, said Foyt. All I want is the trophy. Moments later, trophy in hand, he boarded a private jet to rush the trophy back to his daddy in Houston.
And I took the trophy back to my father at the hospital. Like I said, I never won another race after that. At least he was one that talked me into going and run the 25 race, and we won the race and brought it back. So that's one of the highlights, I guess, of my career, was being able to do something that he was wanting me to do, and then come back a winner and give him the trophy before he passed on.
While A.J. continued to be competitive at Indianapolis, his life was no longer devoted to racing full-time. He had businesses, horses, and the place he could get away from it all, the ranch he bought in 1964.
I can come out here and I can get on a tractor and the phone's not ringing or somebody's not running up to the door ringing a doorbell. So when I come out here, I try to stay to myself and I actually just work around the clock, and I can work whatever hours I want to and do what I want to do.
A.J. being A.J., he began breeding racehorses and spawned a winner named Rare Brick. Foyt's aspiration, of course, was to win the Indy 500 of the four-legged set, the Kentucky Derby.
We could have had 2 or 3 horses probably good enough to run the Derby, but I didn't care just to go there if we didn't feel we could win. And the name of the game is winning.
By the late 80s, A.J.'s interest in his true profession resurfaced, and he began running the full circuit again. Road America is a fast and famous road course tucked away in the rolling hills of Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. In September of 1990, it almost hosted A.J.'s last rites. Whistling into a corner at 170 miles per hour, the brake pedal broke and sent Foyt hurtling off the track and into an earth bank. The results were horrendous.
And as I went to apply the brakes, the brake pedal fell off. Well, the corner's about a 120-mile-an-hour corner, so I went to turn right, but I realized there was no trashy fence there, and I knew I was going to fly off the course, but I didn't want to barrel roll sideways. So instead of turning, I elected to straighten the car up real quick and go off. Well, when the car went off, it went airborne, and I guess for 300 or 400 feet. I remember seeing the treetops, and I knew right then that this was going to be a rough one, which it was.
Dr. Terry Trammell, the orthopedic surgeon who's been putting race drivers back together for the past decade, arrived at the accident and, at first glance, thought Foyt's feet had been severed. The front of the car was decimated, and unfortunately for A.J., the impact hadn't knocked him unconscious.
The biggest thing I kept saying, you know, I was hurting. They didn't give me IV, and they said they'd give me like 15 cc's of morphine in the arm, and I said, man, y'all got to do something. It's killing me, and I was trapped in the car for about 45 minutes or something like that. And before they even got me out of the car, the helicopter had come from Milwaukee. They shut the race down. And I finally told somebody, I can't remember who, I said, just pick up a hammer and get me out of my misery. I said, hit me in the head. I mean, that's how bad it's hurting. And I meant it. It wasn't a joke deal. I mean, I just said, hit me with something. So they got me out of the car and they flew me to the hospital.
At his first press conference since being injured, A.J. was pretty spry, but his legs and feet were a mess. Dr. Trammell confessed privately he just hoped the king would be able to walk again.
I started pointing to Indy from the day they laid me in the bed. And the story come back to me if I went to Indy that I might drive, but they'd have to carry me in my car. I made up my mind I would walk to the race car.
Well, he always said, I guess from the time he was in the hospital, he said he was going to get back to Indy. And the doctors kept saying, you know, I think they kept saying, well, we'll see. And at first they said, no way, no way. And that makes him a little more determined. And then they'd say, well, we'll see. And he knew that they knew no way. And he was determined to show them. I think if anything else, that's what kept him going. He was determined to show him he was going to get it.
The therapy required to recover would have exhausted a kid, let alone a 56-year-old man. But Houston Oilers owner Bud Adams offered A.J. the use of his workout room and, more importantly, the services of strength coach Steve Watterson.
There are certain athletes that have something. It's an intangible element. It's an eye of a tiger, if you want to use a cliche, that keeps so focused on what their goal is that nothing daunts them from changing it. A.J. has that. I would set up many goals for him all along the way for him to achieve. And he did those things to please me, not to please himself, because he never had any other goal but to be back here in Indianapolis.
He would come home just totally exhausted. But he was up and ready to go the next day again.
I was so determined to make it that I think I had to die or I was going to make it.
Walking, something that seemed to be an impossibility for at least 6 months, became a reality by February. And he was back testing at Indy in March and set up shop in Gasoline Alley for the 34th consecutive month of May.
I think the funniest thing was when I had the plane that was just going to take us up to Indy, take the physical and go to the race. I went to get out of bed. I had to get on the nightstand, and I reached over and touched the wall, and I could barely get to the bathroom.
And he got about halfway across the room, and he turned around and looked at it. He says, I'm going to Indy to race. I mean, it was just hysterical because he couldn't even walk at that time, hardly. But he did it. He made it, and he did well.
Always the crowd favorite anyway, A.J.'s every move and sighting brought thunderous ovations each day during May.
They were so enthusiastic for him, and I think everybody just knowing what he had accomplished to get there was even, you know, pulling a little bit harder for him to do well.
I think the people took the hurt away, the way they was cheering and all that. It hurt a little later that night, but no, when I was in the car, when I rolled out to qualify, I think the pain went away. I didn't feel it at all. And then to be fortunate enough to qualify second fast time, start the front row, is just kind of like a story come true. It really meant a lot to me.
After the qualifying, everybody was so happy, and then the race was going well.
Well, actually, the race started off real good, and I was trying to pace myself a little bit because, you know, I hadn't really raced a car or anything like that. And we had a malfunction in the pits. The air jack broke, one, then the other one broke, and that's what got us way behind. So then I started trying to step up my pace and hustle up and get back through there, and I seen the wreck start happening. I thought I had it cleared, and just like I said, like a saying, I said a scud must have fell out of the sky, broke up in the middle of the sky, because I never saw the piece that come down top of my car till right before it hit.
His car's suspension damaged by the falling debris, A.J. limped around the track and headed for the pits, waving what everyone assumed was a final goodbye. It was a magic moment in racing history.
Well, it was a thrill I could be there, but it was disappointing to have to go out the way I went out. Indy's just meant a lot to me. Like my father and mother waited till I qualified. I'd come home. They both lost their lives. I was one of the last ones to win it, and there was still brick on the front straightaway. And I guess because I've been there so long, I've seen the cars change. If somebody would have told me 200 miles an hour wouldn't make the race anymore, back when I first went there, I said, are you crazy? And I'm just glad I've been able to compete there for so many years and see so many changes. And it would just take you forever for me to explain the thrills and the happiness and the things that's happened to me there that's made me really love Indy like I do.
Probably there are a lot of people who weren't even born, okay, when A.J. won his last race. And they're A.J. Foyt fans. I think there's just, there's just this sense of greatness that shrouds him, and even though they, can't, recall in their own mind when the last time A.J. Foyt won a race was, it's been instilled in them, by their parents, by by their older brothers or sisters, that A.J. Foyt is the greatest race driver that maybe ever lived.
A.J. survived in an era when others didn't. A.J. scored most of his victories at a time in which going to a funeral once every couple of weeks was pretty commonplace. There has never been a machine that A.J. hasn't won in. The fact that he's won across the broad spectrum of motorsports makes him, without question in my mind, the finest driver that's ever taken a wheel. That may change, but it's going to be a long time coming.
You know, just to see A.J. come out onto the track at Indianapolis and the thousands of fans standing and shouting, A.J., A.J., it's a magic.
I'm going to listen to the fans a lot more than I'll ever listen to the news media, because first of all, I don't think they really know when I want to quit. And like I said, they've always come back and said, well, you have nothing to prove. I understand that, but as long as I feel that I'm going to give it 100% and I still got a chance to win, I'll still be there.
A.J. Foyt hasn't watched the evolution of speed. He's shaped it.
A highly competitive, a self-mechanic, he's a controversial man. A tough, talking, a self-designer, and a friend of all the fans. From the king racing, driving, winning, speedway country fans. This Houston Grand Prix driving champion, A.J. Foyt's a man. He's a race driving, two-fisted Texas man. He's number one all across the land. He's a race driving, two-fisted Texas man. A mean machine, a coyote scream.